believe me, once you set your mind to this, what I teach you is easier than what you do in your company. Like, I guarantee that you as an operator of your company have more complex tasks on your plate than what I'm asking you to learn. And yes, it might be a new concept, so you have to be a learner. But once you master this, it's easier than what I guarantee whatever it is that you do on a daily basis is harder. As we all know, plans change. Mike Tyson says we all have a plan until we get punched in the mouth. Well, business owners, we get punched in the mouth every single day, right? So we are constantly changing our plan. So what we have to understand is that we are going to set up a plan and it's going to change the day we make it. But it is so much easier to change a plan we've already made than to be constantly coming up with ways to proceed without any idea of what we're trying to do.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Freedom Experience. I'm your host, John Moncrief, and I've got a great episode for you today. It's all about business finance, but if you've ever wondered why your profit and loss statement looks so great, but your bank account tells you a different story, well, this is the episode for you. My guest today is Tracy Bech. She's the founder of 60 Minute CFO and the author of the book 60 Minute CFO, which is all about bridging the gap between business and finance. So Tracy's on a mission to help entrepreneurs master the language of finance without all the overwhelm. And with her relatable, hard-earned insights, she's turned her own School of Hard Knocks experience into a roadmap for business owners who want to build a profitable, resilient business. In our conversation, Tracy shares how she went from being a web developer to a jewelry e-commerce entrepreneur and growing that to a multi-million-dollar business, while learning the critical financial lessons that we all have to learn as entrepreneurs along the way. And she breaks down why so many business owners struggle to plan and how to use financial ratios to really fine-tune our business engines, and why understanding the balance sheet just might save your business. We also talk about the phases of business growth, going from Wonder to Blunder to Thunder, and how to avoid slipping into the Plunder phase when you're thinking or you're eyeing an exit. So, if you want to stop flying blind with numbers and finally feel confident about your business finances, then stick around. And listen, don't forget to grab Tracy's book. It's probably one of the best books I've read on business and finance, and just really kind of identifying the ratios that you need to fine tune to make your business engine hum. So let's dive into my conversation with Tracy Bech. Tracy, welcome to the show. Fantastic to have you on. I'm super excited for today.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
We were just talking before we started about how we come from sort of similar backgrounds. I built a business back in the internet days, the late 90s, and you also come from a very creative background, but you've gone into finance now and simplifying finance, fortunately. But I'd love to hear your story and share your story with the audience.
Yeah, you bet. And yes, as we said during our pre-chat, I'll try not to go too deep down into any one piece of the story because there are lots of pieces to it, but I'll keep it broader. And if you have questions, we can go deeper on whatever pieces.
Sounds good.
But yeah, no, I started back in the early 2000s as a web developer and coming into various people's companies and really learning and understanding what they needed in terms of a website. And when I say website, we did less of the brochure type branding pieces and more of content management and web application type products for people. And what I didn't know at the time was, in order to build something that really performs for a company, you have to come in and understand their company. Right. You gotta live and sit with them for a little bit. So I would travel out and meet with them. And they would talk me through, what a day in the life looks like here, which really then we went back and tried to answer the question, how can we provide a return on this investment for you? And that might mean simplifying a process, streamlining something internally for them, making something that was manual now automated, or just straight up, how can we bring more leads to you and really use the power of the internet to expand your reach? Right. So one of the things that I think of is that was, without knowing it, every time I got to meet with a new client, it was almost a little case study, like at business school,
like a lesson in business. Yeah. Every time
Yeah. And so it didn't matter. Like, I had all kinds of clients, right? Like, we did Seattle Cancer Care Alliance, and their whole mission is to help cure cancer through research and clinical trials. So I had to understand all of the workings of that organization. And then I had a bronze sculptor, and he was just trying to connect his art to people who were collectors of art, right? And he was all about educating on like a foundry and the lost art waxing and, cast waxing and like all these casting things. And, my brain would just get totally, I did work with, the infrastructure for the power grid. And I had to learn what like how we power the grid. Right. And I was like, I didn't even know we had a grid. I was like in my late 20s at the time, I didn't know anything about anything. So, we fast forward, like I'm getting this mini business degree. I didn't even know it, but I was having fun and doing all this stuff. The other segment of clients that we worked with were e-commerce clients. And this is, again, like the early 2000s and coming up on the mid, like 2005, 2006, 2007. So you're not quite to that Shopify where you just grab a website and off you go, sell your product. We were building everything bespoke, and we had our own tools and, things that we had to build out for people. And we were doing work for one of our clients. And at one point I was really thinking more about the functionality and making sure we were, all the tubes and wires were hooked up and all the orders were coming through.
All the plumbing's done, it's all working.
Yes. Yeah. Like all of this is up and running so he can go out and sell his products. And then one day I finally looked into the financial side of it and the reporting side and realized it just hadn't crossed my mind to look at the volume of orders coming through, both from, I knew the number of orders. I didn't know the revenue. He was doing millions of dollars of revenue through this website that we built him. And this little little ching kind of went off in my mind. And I was like, wait a minute. Like we just built out of thin air a tool that if you put the right product into can generate millions of dollars. Like that's kind of cool. Like we did that. Yeah. We know how to do that here in-house. And I thought to myself, to your point, like things were kind of changing in the .com world. And it was also coming up in 2008. So the recession, the housing crisis and everything was happening. And I was thinking it might be kind of smart to like diversify a little bit here. So we're not just asking for people's marketing budgets and getting denied, on the client side of things. What if we built our own website and sold our own product? Famous, last words, thinking like that's all we have to do. And little did I realize this was an actual pivot from being a service-based business to a products-based business. And that you're going from running an agency to being a retailer.
And carrying stock and inventory and all that.
And carrying physical products. Yes. Products. So had I understood the concept a little bit more clearly, I might have had a few more thoughts around why I should or shouldn't do this. But at the time, again, for myself, my 20s and 30s, you couldn't stop me. Like if I had an idea, I was just going to do it. Like there just was no stopping my will to do something. So I remember telling my business partner, like, let's do this. Let's see if we can't just find something to sell and we'll make money while we sleep. And the spoiler alert here is that we ended up picking a product and we had a little algorithm that it needed to meet. It needed to be lightweight, easy to ship, non-perishable, not fragile, and have a really great markup, a really great margin. And we settled on designer jewelry.
Okay.
So we start buying jewelry. We don't know anything. Like we're website nerds, right? Like we are not fashion buyers. We don't know anything about this. We don't even know how to interact with the brands that we're carrying, but we're doing our best and we're analyzing all of this jewelry based on keyword trends in Google. So we're using just all like our search engine optimization knowledge to decide what to buy, which turned out to be a very successful strategy, especially at this time.
Because most businesses don't do enough research to start with, do they?
Yes, we had a huge head start being web developers because we were experts at the engineering of this way of selling. So it sounds silly because people who are expert at retail, I have a huge respect for, but at the time, all we had to do was figure out retail and how to appeal to consumers. So, which on the web at that time wasn't hard to do, just because there wasn't that much competition. So the website takes off. And next thing we know, a few years in, we are doing hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue, and we're pretty excited about it. But this piece of the puzzle that we really didn't understand was we thought we had a really simple strategy around managing the inventory. And mind you, when we were managing our finances on the website development side, we had no inventory, right? In order to make a website, we just sat down at the same old computer we made all the other websites on and
Built the
made it.
website.
Yeah, we didn't have to buy any pieces. And the thought process that we had for the retail site was, for every time we sold a lot of bracelets. So every time we sold a bracelet, because it was 2 to 2.5 times markup, we could turn around and buy 2 more. So you sell 1 and you buy 2. And if you are familiar with cash flow principles, what you would immediately intuitively understand would be that means we have no cash, because we are investing in the products 100%, right? Like we're reinvesting 100% of our cash.
Yeah.
But because we were not fluent in that side of things at all, because we didn't need to be previously, we didn't come in with any of that knowledge. What we were doing was we were looking at all of our profits. So we were like, oh my gosh, we have so much profit. And I would keep running the income statement and be like, oh my gosh, like we have it was a really lean team. It was like myself and my business partner really doing this in our spare time. We were still running the website agency and doing this like very part-time, but making all this money and thinking to ourselves, would it be really cool if we could like start paying ourselves from this company? And my partner would say, where's all the money? And I would look in the bank account. I have no money. No money.
So you're just looking at the income statement, looking at the top line, the bottom line, and nothing.
Top line looks great. Bottom line looks great. Like 30% margin. Yeah. But then the bank account looks horrible. No money. Yeah. And I remember her looking at me and going, well, where's all the money? And I was like, I don't know. And I was thinking in my head, she was the computer scientist, right? She was our engineer. And I was like, oh man, this is like really bad if she doesn't know where the money is, because she's a lot smarter than me. So if she doesn't know, how are we going to figure this out? And I remember we were sitting in this little room, our conference room for our website agency, which we had like, oh man, we were such bootstrappers. We had turned into half of it is inventory storage. And I looked over at all of our inventory. And I was like, oh my God, I think I just found the money.
There's gold on those.
We have there's like, what do they say in Arrested Development? There's money in the banana stand. Yeah, like I was like, I found it. So we were like, well, then how do we have all these profits, right? And the answer is in the mysterious and often overlooked balance sheet. And sure enough, we weren't even accounting for our inventory properly. We had to figure this all out on a real bookkeeping standpoint. So what we ended up doing was, well, developing a real respect for the balance sheet, figuring out that this inventory piece directly affects the cash. And so depending on how much and how fast we want to replenish our inventory, and also for how many days of growth we want to be having in stock here, right? Like, do we need 30 days, 60 days, 90 days of stock? That's going to directly impact if we have any cash at all or how much cash we have. This I'm simplifying because it took us months, and we ended up building out a very intricate and bespoke cash flow management tool for ourselves, which again, we were data scientists really. So we were building out our own little algorithm for how quickly things were selling. It would tell us how quickly we needed to replenish, and for each SKU and for each supplier, and how long those turn around times, like how long it took us to get those things in stock, blah, 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 right? So we had to do this really carefully and really methodically. But what we figured out was that by honoring the balance sheet and how much is sitting in there in inventory and slowing our growth, right? Like really being a little less foot on the gas, and we'd have to put our foot on the brake, but we need to like know when to coast. A little bit. We opened up the cash for our path to actually paying ourselves, A, and B, being able to actually reinvest in systems and processes and other people to help us, because the business went very quickly from a couple $100,000 of revenue to over $6 million, $7 million in revenue, right? So in order to do that, the trajectory definitely did that hockey stick. Yeah. And then we had to slow down.
Bring it off.
Exactly. Yes. So that was for us. And then the turning points here is, as you build a business, a new shiny business, we did end up selling the web design development company. So we became familiar with what it looks like to exit a company. And then we focused all of our efforts on the e-commerce company. As we were building the e-commerce company, our competitors, who were distant competitors, over the years we were doing it, became on our heels competitors. And the feelings around how comfortable this business was to run became less. Like, we were very uncomfortable with for our own risk tolerance, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's one thing to kind of have a head start. It's totally another thing to have Amazon, Bloomingdale, Nordstrom's, like all of the big guys who have, every single trick in the book to put you out of business at their disposal. So
now the pressure's on to grow or to do something.
Yeah.
Like, what do we do?
Yeah. The pressure was to grow or to pivot. And I just didn't see enough blue sky and blue ocean in the pivot that I got. You just kind of know like what you're up for and what you're not up for. And so we very openly and honestly put the business on the market to sell, knowing like this is your opportunity here. Like who wants to take this very established, essentially, extremely profitable and stable business, but you probably have another year before you really need to put your pivot in place because our competitors are knocking on the door. It was acquired in 30 days,
Wow.
which was its own story
Yeah.
in and of itself. And sadly, they did not pivot. So that story came to its own end. But my pivot, John, is where I realized that the success of the project for me was the learnings that I took away from the financial side.
So you stepped away, and then you, after that exit,
Yes,
and figured, I need to figure this out and teach it.
Yes. And it wasn't as straightforward as you might think, because the story was that, so my dad, who is my co-author, co-founder,
yes,
and has always been my mentor, was kind of putting the capstone on his career in terms of teaching business finance. And the capstone was the first draft of 60 Minute CFO.
Okay.
So he came to me and said, hey, you just sold your business. You know how to sell things online. I just wrote this book. Why don't you read it? Tell me what you think and help me sell it online. I read it. And mind you, the piece I didn't put in here was, as my mentor, he was very helpful when I started my web design and development company, because he said, oh, hey, you're doing a service-based business. Let me help you get started. When I pivoted to products and e-commerce, he looked at me like I was from Mars and kind of said, I don't understand. Like, what are you doing? What is this? Like, he just didn't, I think it was probably the age and stage of his own career that e-commerce just wasn't on his map as to businesses he felt like he could advise. Little did he know that once I read his book, every single thing I learned by doing everything.
Clicked.
Yeah. I was like, I did all of this the hard way. And had you just sat me down and taught me about the balance sheet, it's the same. It doesn't matter where you're selling this. If you're selling it in a lemonade stand or in a brick and mortar store at Walmart or online, this balance sheet operates the same. So I kind of had a moment with him where I was like, you totally could have helped me out. But I'm so grateful for learning all of my lessons the hard way. Had I not had that moment in that conference room with my business partner and said, where's the money? I wouldn't have this so strong, like in my bones, strong appreciation for the balance sheet. And I'm a hard-headed, stubborn entrepreneur, and I'm not gonna care until I understand why I need to care, and that just solidified it for me. So this is how, when I said, I'm not just gonna help you sell the book, Dad, I'm gonna teach it. And so he's now retired, but for a couple of years there we co-taught, and he has the BA and the MBA in finance.
Yeah, finance.
And I have this like School of Hard Knocks MBA.
Yeah.
Right.
And you brought them together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brilliant.
So when you're looking at me going, hey, I don't really know why I should care about the balance sheet. And I go, I know why you don't feel like you should care about the balance sheet. Yeah. I've been there. And let me tell you, here's how you're going to get yourself unstuck. And this is how I'm going to tell you how to do it. And this is what you're going to get out of that. And then you're going to let yourself, like, you're basically going to, go to the next level. Like, now you have strength and confidence in your financials. You could do this. So it has been extremely fun for me to do. And it's a winding path, right? Entrepreneurship is a winding road. So, yeah.
So there was I think there were at least two stats in your book that just kind of jumped out at me that were like, wow. One of them was I think maybe 2% of business owners do any kind of financial forecasting, and the other one was around only 5% of business owners actually have a plan. I'm curious why we're so bad at this in your mind. I mean, you work with business owners all the time.
Yeah.
Why is it? I think there's a kind of a much broader issue before we get down to the financial stuff. But why are we so bad at this?
Well, so there's a couple of reasons why. A lot of us don't know how to plan. And so it's really hard to sit down to set yourself up to do a task that you really don't know where to start on, right? And you can look around on the internet and in books, and you get like a million different recipes and methodologies for planning. And some are really big, and you need to take a week, and you need to go off site, and you need to have facilitation and, note takers. And others are really simple. And so somewhere in between is where we just need to sit down and take away the fear and just go for it. And that second piece is really the fear, because it's the fear of being wrong. And when we set up a plan and we do it in front of our teams, even sometimes if you're a solopreneur doing it with yourself, it's this fear of saying, this is where I want to go, and then not getting there, right? What if we don't get there? And we think,
I love it,
then, yeah, right. And then we think
So
to
true.
ourselves, what's the point of this? Because it probably won't happen anyways. Like, as we all know, plans change. It's Mike Tyson says, we all have a plan until we get punched in the mouth. Well, business owners, we get punched in the mouth every single day, right? So we are constantly changing our plan. So what we have to understand is that we are going to set up a plan, and it's going to change the day we make it. But it is so much easier to change a plan we've already made than to be constantly coming up with ways to proceed without any template, without any idea of what we're trying to do. So it's really the fear and the lack of knowledge that sets us just like on the sidelines, and we don't want to do this. We just think. And then the third piece, though, and let's be real, it's really why a lot of us don't do a lot of the things we should do, is the time. We just don't make the time. Yeah. But that's kind of,
I think that fear is such a big one. You're so right. Fear of not hitting the numbers, fear of the ego and being in front of the team and not kind of making those numbers holds us back from putting the plan together. And sure, the first few quarters we may not get where we want to go, but we can only get better at forecasting.
Yes.
Keep at it, keep going. And I think that's so critical.
I use the analogy a lot, and I think this applies to lots of people's way of doing business. But if we were all going on a road trip together, and I said, Jean, you're in charge of navigating, the first question you would ask me is, where are we going?
Yeah.
And me, as the person who decided to go on the road trip, as the business owner, it's my job to tell you where we're going, right?
Yeah.
And now we might get going in the car, and we might have it all mapped out. Like, we're in fact, Google Maps is going to map it out for us, right? So there we go. But the problem is we're going to get going, and there's immediately going to be detour due to construction. There's going to be weather that happens. And you know what? We're going to get like 100 miles in, and we're going to go, wait, you know what? I just read something, and it sounds like it might be better to go over here instead. But that's okay, because you couldn't have gotten us 100 miles down the road without that first destination that I gave you. And so together as the team, it's not like and you wouldn't look at me and go, how come you didn't know that there was going to be a snowstorm? How come you didn't know there was construction? Like, that's not how it works, right? We all are on the same team, but we just need to give ourselves a little bit of direction, right? A plan, a forecast. So
know where we're going. And even if the road is a little bit kind of windy, we get there in the end. That's
and even if we choose to go someplace else, it's an informed choice. It's like, well, we headed in this direction. It would actually make sense to go a little bit further over here. Like they're having a music festival we want to check out. Like all the things that you do when you go on a journey, right?
Mm-hmm. So going back to what we were talking about earlier about just kind of looking at top line, bottom line, and kind of being overly focused, I guess, on the income statement. What you've got the sort of three statements, the numbers, the ratios between them, and then those 12 key ratios, which almost, if I was an entrepreneur, either putting a CEO and going and sitting on an island somewhere, are the things that I need to be looking at all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe tell us a little bit about that, about those ratios and the relationships between the three main things that I should be looking at as a business owner: balance sheet, cash flow.
Yeah. Okay. So let's walk through the broad 3 steps that you take to become financially fluent as a leader. And so we're not talking about turning you into a CFO when we say 60-minute CFO. We're talking about turning you as a leader into somebody who's financially fluent and can take 60 minutes and get what they need out of their financials, right? So the first step is using, instead of just looking at your financial statements just as they come out in their format, report style, instead of just looking at a wall of numbers, it's about creating relationships between those numbers. So it's understanding the key ratios. So you just said, hey, there are the key ratios that 60-minute CFO teaches. So the first step is understanding what those are and where we get them from. And there are 3 levels of profitability on your income statement. And that's the difference between knowing your dollars or your dollars as a percentage of total revenue, right? Which is a percentage. Yeah. So I always use the example here is like, raise your hand if you think $5 million of profit is good. And people in my class will just like, or in the room will be like, yeah, totally, I'll take it. $5 million sounds amazing. And I said, but you didn't know what the revenue was. If the revenue is $5 billion, you're barely breaking even, right? Yeah. So we can't go around going, oh yeah, our net profits were, $10 million this year. That's fine, but that's a vanity metric. What we really need to know is the percentage of revenue. So the profit margin. Is your profit margin 10%? Is your profit margin 20%? Because now we can use that percentage, and it can be the same whether your revenue is high or your revenue is low. We can always be trying to make a set percentage of profits, right? And that also allows you to benchmark yourself against an industry average or your peers. And it allows you to understand, even how you do with respects to other industries, right? Like, what are your profit margins comparatively? So profit margins, and not just knowing profits, is a big one. On the balance sheet, there are, we kind of lump one that sort of spans two statements, but it's your current ratio and your debt to equity ratio. Now, current ratio has a fun meaning, which is really your liquidity. So your current ratio on your balance sheet is really just taking your current assets and dividing them by your current liabilities. And I don't want this to turn into a bookkeeping class, so we don't have to go into that. But we're talking about liquidity, and your liquidity, when we start looking at the ratio of how much you have in assets, current assets, so short-term assets, to what your short-term payables are, we're talking about your ability to pay your bills. So as a business owner, you pull up your balance sheet, it looks like, who cares? But you now dial into, well, what's the current ratio? Oh, well, that's, if it's above 2, we can pay our bills twice over, right? If it's 3, we could pay each of our bills 3 times over. Yeah. So we start to give ourselves like this meaning behind the numbers. This is how easy it is for us to pay our bills. It's our liquidity. The second one is debt to equity. And debt to equity is exactly what you say. You add up all your debt and divide it by your equity. It is known as your safety. And safety's definition is your ability to withstand adversity, which, taking it one step further, is understanding how easy it would be for you to get a loan right now if you needed to.
Okay. Yeah,
because
makes sense.
when you're up against adversity and really times are tough, it means you need some cash, right? You need an infusion. You probably need to get some sort of outside funding. If we let our debt to equity ratio get outside of a lendable limit, which is above 3, banks are not as excited about that. And there's always an exception to the rule, but I'm speaking broadly here. We know we're in a territory where if we needed it, we probably wouldn't get that lending, right? There's so many other things that a bank will look at as well, but this is your leading indicator. So your ability to withstand adversity. Now there's a third one that kind of takes a little bit of the income statement, but it's mostly on the balance sheet, and that is your survival score. Survival score is a term unique to 60-minute CFO, but it's in the banking and in the investing world also known as the Z score. But this is your likelihood of going bankrupt. And it's not a death sentence, but it takes into account a lot of factors on the balance sheet, plus your net income or your net profits, right? Those are synonyms. And it tells you how close you are to running out of options. Okay. And, meaning your last option when your business is in real dire straits is your articles of bankruptcy, right? Your bankruptcy. And if it's starting to get to 2 or lower, again, leading indicator, we need to start correcting some things. If it's higher than that, you're doing well, right? And we have some other scales in there to indicate excellence as well. 5 and higher is really great. So those are the 3 on the balance sheet. Then we get into our operating performance ratios. There's 6 of those. These are really helpful, and some businesses use all 6. Some don't necessarily need all of them. And then others are like, I absolutely have to have 12. Okay. And at 60 Minute CFO, we're all about simplicity. So we give you 6 to start with, and we will allow you to have others, but we always caution, right? Like as soon as you start putting too much on your plate to measure, you get overwhelmed.
There's just too much. Yeah. It's like having too many priorities, too much to measure.
Right. Yeah. You can't have all these as priorities. Yeah. So, and I'll breeze through these, but it's return on equity is a great one to measure. Receivable days. So in other words, letting too many things go out, invoices that haven't been paid. We need to keep an eye on that. Inventory days, which was a big one for me, right? Like, do I have 30 days of inventory in stock or 300 days of inventory in stock? When I had 300 days of inventory in stock, I had no cash, right? So managing that to the right level for your company. Payable days is the opposite of receivable days. It's how many days of our own bills we owe. And we want to keep that in a manageable place. But if we're paying them super fast, again, we might not have as much cash. If we pay them really slow, we might negatively affect our vendor relationships. And then revenue. Oh, and survival score, I included in balance sheet. It kind of lives on operating performance as well. That's the 5th one here. And then the 6th one is revenue per admin employee, which gives you a really great objective measure of how well staffed. And that can be 2 different things. Are you understaffed or overstaffed for the amount of revenue that you're bringing in? Now, you're not attributing revenue to these administrative employees. They're administrative by nature, so they're not creating revenue. But employees is a really hard one because we have a lot of emotion around who works for us. Yeah. So this provides a little bit of objectivity. And when we can keep it as a ratio to revenue, so it's a head count. It's a head count to revenue. It gives us just a little bit more of a data point rather than going off of a gut instinct.
Yeah, I guess just going back to what we were saying earlier, most of us kind of pick up the income statement, look at revenue, look at profit, don't even spend much time on profit margin. It's like, okay, there's profit down the bottom there, exactly to what you said. 5 million on 5 billion is
break even. Yeah.
But
yeah.
What this is giving a leadership team is a set of kind of almost dials that they can tune the engine with, sort of dialing them different ways to make sure that the whole business is performing optimally. Yes. And you talked about phases that we go through. A startup goes through this kind of wonder phase. A high growth or growth business is going through the blundering phase, which I'm kind of fairly used to. A more mature business is thunder, which is, I guess, where you ideally want to be. And then the decline is the sort of plundering phase. And I guess I'm just thinking, I had a conversation with the CEO today who said to me, so we're at 10 million right now. We want to get the business to 22 million over the next 3.5 years. We want to go from 400 to 1,000 clients. We want to go from, I think they're probably around 6.2 million in EBITDA at the moment, and they want to get that up to 12.5 million or something like that. I suspect that they're probably in that thunder phase at the moment. They're doing really well, and they just want to kind of up the dial now. And going back to what you say about grow broke, and I'm not saying they may do phenomenally well.
Yes.
But this feels like this is kind of transitioning from either being in thunder to kind of going back to blunder, or it could be. And
And it's when I teach these phases of business, I always talk about the fact that it's really hard to get to thunder and stay there. It's almost like trying to stay on a knife's edge, because it's the adage is if you're not growing, you're shrinking. It's it's almost hard. It's so hard to just stay the same. So if you're saying, well, you've got to grow, it's also sometimes really hard to do just like moderate growth, right? It oftentimes, if you've saturated your market and you've tapped out like where you can go with this team, sometimes in order to get to the next level, you have to invest a lot, maybe in overhead and team and headcount. So then you would want your revenue to also grow a lot.
Yeah.
Which would, yes, exactly, put you back into blunder and high growth. So the point though is that a lot of times for your first run, like for the first high growth stage of a business, what we're talking about at 60 Minute CFO is either not understood at all, or if you know it, it is so in the back seat and of your mind that it doesn't ever get any airtime.
Yeah.
And that's just because you're busy. High growth is busy, right? You don't have time to put into that. So the controlled high growth, right? We talk about if you are watching your growth take off, we can manage the ratios accordingly. We don't have to project the house burning down while we're growing.
Yeah.
We can project controlled, sustained, so that we don't take our debt to equity from probably usually in a mature company, which would be the Thunder stage, your debt to equity is like super safe, right? You've paid off all your loans, and if you needed any to begin with, and then when you want to grow, you might borrow some money, but you don't need to take it all the way to the max, right? You can watch and say, well, we don't ever really want to go above 1.5 on our debt to equity.
Yeah.
You can give yourself these bumpers, and guardrails as you're doing it. Yeah.
But actually having access to this kind of dashboard for the leadership team to be able to see those key indicators rather than just a income statement and in many cases there's probably a balance sheet and a cash flow, but they're not really looking at those ratios. And I think that's where the surprises can kind of come from. They maybe don't fully understand what they're looking at, or at least potentially the CFO knows what they're looking at, but the rest are.
Well, so you're queuing me up for that second phase of that second step in becoming financially fluent, which is and the third, I'll give you both. So the second step is understanding the difference between cash and profits. And then the third step is learning how to forecast the 3-statement model. So not just forecasting that income statement, but doing a balance sheet as well, which the cash flow statement, the good news on the cash flow statement is it's derived. So as soon as you do your income statement forecast and your balance sheet forecast, you get a cash flow forecast.
Yeah.
So that's a really nice bonus, right? You didn't have to do any of that. It just comes with it. But that second step is where we, not knowing the difference between cash and profits, which you heard me, I knew I had a lot of profits, but I had no cash and I didn't know why. And it's really bringing on that respect and understanding for how that balance sheet's going to work as you grow those profits. And yes, when you say we're going to grow our revenue and that's going to grow our profits and our EBITDA, you forget to say, but what's going to happen to our cash, because you forget to say what's going to happen to our balance sheet. So when that company comes to you and they say, we're going to do this, the response is, that sounds great. It sounds to me like you have forecasted your income statement, but let's forecast the balance sheet so that we can figure out what your cash flow is going to look like, because we are going to need, because cash is king. Right? Like
cash fuels the growth.
that's the oxygen that your business runs on. Yeah. So let's figure out if this is sustained. And I just did this with one of the companies that I advise for. And they said, this is what we're going to do for revenue. This is what we need to do on the expenses. So we had our income statement all forecasted out. I said, okay, well, talk to me about inventory. What kind of inventory are we going to, and they import things and they manufacture things. So it's all kinds of work to do on the balance sheet. And I said, this looks great. But let's go see if we can afford it on the balance sheet. So sure enough, we had to kind of understand like, oh no, we do need to buy some things in bulk. We need to put in some big orders. So that's going to actually increase our inventory days. And, that's going to tie up a lot of our cash. So, how is this going to look? And I said, why don't we go over and tinker with some of these investments, some of these expenses we're spending, push them off to Q3, and for next year, or now it's this year. And so we can afford it. right? Or we need to look into how else we're going to finance this. So that's the missing piece. That's where most of us stop, is the income statement.
Yeah. And it's kind of being able to get in there and intelligently make those decisions based on the data across all three pieces, all three
Exactly.
sheets. Yeah.
And that second step in our three steps is the one that says, wait, yeah, even if you're listening to me right now and you're still just like, Tracy, the balance sheet means nothing to me, I don't care. If you care about cash, it does mean something to you. And I joke, there's a graphic in the book that is so basic. It's basically a 3x2 grid that shows you the drivers of cash on the income statement and the drivers of cash on the balance sheet. And I joke that people should get it tattooed on their forearm so that they have it handy at all times. It's like it would be the worst tattoo ever, but aesthetically speaking. But for understanding finance, it's extremely helpful. And the thing is what you just heard me say, is there are twice as many things that affect cash, drivers of cash on the balance sheet, than there are on the income statement. The only thing on the income statement that has any effect on your cash is whether you had a profit or you had a loss.
Yeah.
And I suppose to what degree, right? But the balance sheet has assets that go up, assets that go down, which is two things, liabilities that go up and liabilities that go down, which is another two things. And that's very dynamic, right? And you're not always thinking about how that affects your cash. So.
And as you said, that's very dynamic. It's changing all the time. And yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So, I mean, I'm thinking back to scenario that I was talking about earlier with my own business, where we saw massive opportunity to grow. We kind of went 5 million, 10 million, 15 million. And for me, that point came where I think you realize that you're blundering around. Were you taking on or the sheer amount of money that it takes to grow a business? And it's easy to say, well, at least it was back then, bring in more scanning devices, kind of take a finance to bring in more equipment, hire more people. But then you're not kind of watching what's happening on the balance sheet. More and more staff, we go from a couple or 50, 60 staff to sort of 200 staff. And then the customer starts to have problems.
Yes.
And all of a sudden you can't meet those obligations. And it's, yeah.
Yes. And there is, of course, and that's kind of that whole, when we talk about forecasting as well, I always recommend doing your best case scenario, worst case scenario, and most likely. So we call it 5-8-5, where 8 out of 10 likelihood of happening is your most likely case. And then a 5 out of 10 likelihood of happening for worst and best case. So you've got 3 now. And that's where you can kind of say, yeah, what if the industry suffers? What if the economy suffers? What if these 3 clients go away? Yes. Mm-hmm.
You can actually accurately forecast what's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and then to the best case scenario side of things, I think we were talking about tax bills, right? What's the tax liability? If we really knock it out of the park here, and we're assuming we can just reinvest and really use this to grow, but remembering that the tax liability that comes with it. And that was also a piece. It wasn't part of my almost growing broke story, but when you have inventory, that is actually taxable. That has not shown up as an expense yet. So that income that you reinvested is taxable, but guess what? You don't have the cash. So we have to really, that's the other gotcha here, is when you grow and you're thinking I certainly will only have to pay a portion of what I have in cash. No, you actually have to pay that inventory it's why we see profits and we have no cash. That's the double whammy.
I think that leads me to the question about finding the right person to sort of help you along this journey. So for me, I was very fortunate. I knew a CFO who was fractional back then, and he came in and helped me sort the problem out. But I think I heard you make a comment once along the lines of CFOs having less kind of qualifications than a hairdresser or something along those lines.
Yes.
How do you find the right? How do you make sure that you're bringing the right person in to solve the problem?
Yes. Well, I'm a big believer in understanding what somebody does in your company before you hire it out, right? So becoming a financially fluent leader, I think, is really step one. So you know what to expect. Yeah, you need to be able to set the standard and hold people to it. And if you don't know what the standard is, you're not going to be able to hold them to it. It leaves you really vulnerable in a lot of ways because it is also your financials. So, so first things first is you got to get through those 3 steps of becoming financially fluent. And I always tell people, believe me, once you set your mind to this, what I teach you is easier than what you do in your company. Like, I guarantee that you as an operator of your company have more complex tasks on your plate than what I'm asking you to learn. And yes, it might be a new concept, so you have to be a learner. But once you master this, it's easier than what I guarantee whatever it is that you do on a daily basis is harder.
So there's got to be this willingness to learn and
Yes.
to become financially literate
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, you got to get there first.
Get that.
Yeah. Then what you're looking for is there are literally, for hiring your CPA, we have a list of things to look for, right? But your finance team should consist of a bookkeeper, depending on the size of your company. But let's say you're a mature company and you've let's say you're doing 5 million in revenue, depending on your industry, maybe 10 million. So you're going to need a staff, and you need a bookkeeper, a controller, and a CFO. And that CFO may maybe even be fractional, right? And if we get back in the car and we're driving, your bookkeeper is the person who's looking in the rearview mirror and taking notes as to where we've been, right? So they're recording every transaction after it's happened, and they're putting it in the right charts of accounts, and they're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. Your controller is actually driving the car, and they have their hands on their steering wheel, and they are helping you spend the money on a day-to-day basis and managing the cash that you have on hand and making sure that we don't run out, right? And keeping you abreast of what's in accounts receivable, what's in payables, what's in the bank, and do we have problems, Houston,
kind
right?
Of oil, gas,
yeah. Looking at that dashboard, are we out of gas? Where's the next gas station? Yes. And then your CFO is looking at the GPS and deciding where we're going to go. And they're saying there is a slowdown on Route 66. We might want to go around it. If we take surface streets and then we get back on the main road, that would do us better, right? They're planning, and they need to understand what you understand as well. And they need to speak to you in the terms that entrepreneurs speak. So when you are finding this person, it is very helpful to explain to them in your entrepreneurial terms where you are going. Again, it's really important to have that vision and clearly explain it to the CFO. If you choose to become financially fluent using 60-minute CFO, make them read the book, because now you can literally be on the same page of a book, and so that we're all speaking the same language, right? In finance, the thing that happens that it just bogs so many people down is all of the various synonyms for the exact same thing, right? Net profit, pre-tax profit, revenue, income, sales, like these things, like they get thrown around, and then people go, oh my God, what are my sales? Well, I only know my revenue. Or
common kind of definitions, know what the terms are that we're using. And
let's stick to that, right? I mean, It sounds so simple, but it honestly, you're a busy entrepreneur, you're a busy business owner. You don't need to get bogged down in all the different jargon. So that person needs to understand that, right? And then they also need to they need to be able to understand the goals and help us get there. And we don't want someone who's just reporting the news and who's just like, well, here are the finances. We want someone who's on the mission with us, on the journey with us, helping us navigate the roadblocks and
what
taking
could be
that
coming
advisory
down the line.
Yes. Yeah. And then the same thing goes for your CPA. I highly recommend interviewing them for, are you an advisory CPA or are you just a by the book, tax accountant? I'm not throwing shade at all at the by the book tax accountants, but they are not going to give you advice, right? Like that's not what they are taught to do in school. They're taught to cross all the T's and dot all the I's with the IRS. So you want to find somebody. I always advocate for finding somebody who's willing to say, yes, I think you have a great financial accounting and reporting team, Or I think you have holes here and I think you need to shore up your system. And hey, I think you're doing great this year. And I think you should look at, additional benefits for your staff because of the amount of revenue and profits that you're doing. And that will actually, help you in tax time. So I always recommend, you want someone who's going to come alongside you and play an advisory role. Those people are harder to find and they are more expensive, but they are worth it because they are described as the person who knows the most about what's happening at your company on a financial basis, but the least able to do anything about it. So
Okay.
if we find someone who's willing and able to advise us, we unlock a whole other knowledge
Kind of level
base.
knowledge.
Yes. Yeah. And it can be very valuable. It also can be really enjoyable because a lot of people that I talk to and teach really dread tax time and talking to their CPA because it's not dynamic and it feels very much like, I wish I would have known this sooner. Right.
Every time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And it's scary. Yeah. Those tax bills are not fun to navigate.
Because you go back to what you're saying earlier. We had a fantastic year. Haven't collected or cash is in the bank as much as we thought, but here's the bill.
Here's your bill.
Every time. Yeah.
It's very
and
scary.
I know fantastic read. We'll put it into the show notes. I think, for all leadership teams, like you were saying earlier, get the whole leadership team to read the book and understand the fundamentals. One of the things I wanted to touch on sort of as a last thing is we started talking about exits and some of the work that you're doing with smaller companies, those companies in what you define as the sort of plunder stage, I guess. And we're going through the silver tsunami that's spoken about so much, where business owners are kind of Gen X, baby boomer. Plunder is perhaps where they're at and it's comfortable. But then they start thinking about selling.
Mm-hmm.
What should they be thinking about at this stage? And I know the book handles a succession plan with a sort of father and son dynamic, but if you're in the plunder stage, are you thinking about reversing into thunder again, or to get ready to? I mean, should you be going? Is that what the aim is? Go back toward thunder.
Yeah. So if you're really in the later stages of business, and plunder is described as almost the same as thunder. And the only way you really know if you're in plunder is by looking at the trends. So you are still profitable. You are still looking good on the balance sheet, but you're not as good as you were.
Yeah.
Right. So it's starting to decline. But so that would be like your data-based plunder indicators. But the other one is if you are feeling complacent. Right. Like, so there's an attitude and a mindset shift as well, which
you kind of go 1 foot out of the door already.
Yeah. And that's just like a natural stage of evolution for leaders, right? Like not all leaders, I mean, as they say, everyone exits, right? Like at some point you will leave your business either by choice or you die or something will happen and you will leave this business. So, but if you are looking for an actual change of ownership, the things that I recommend are it's very similar to if you are to pass your business, onto your son or daughter, or, if it's a family business, which the book describes. But we have to understand what makes this business tick, right? Like what are the things that we have to do within this business to make it run and run successfully? It's those 14 key ratios, right? Like understanding like what creates cash, what creates profits. And then there are other things that you can do. And the book kind of like leaves you hanging a little bit in that respect. But I was actually just talking to somebody who is who does valuations for businesses, right? There is one of the best practices you could start combining into your company on an annual basis right now is building a relationship with somebody who does opinions of value, right? And have them go through your company on the current and trailing 3 to 5 years basis, understand what your EBITDA is, what your cash flow is, all of the other ratios that they'll bring in on top of the 60-minute CFO ratios that really are more with respects to selling a business. And they'll also bring in current market data. They'll tell you what the done deals are in the recent history and what other companies are on the market. It's so much easier. And I've gone through 2 exits, which were pretty ad hoc. I mean, I would say it was not a
Yeah, one
long-term
was like
plan.
30 days and
Yeah, one was 30 days, the other was like 9 months, but it was more just because we had, we were done. We didn't want to do it anymore.
yeah,
But if you're doing a planned, real exit, it's so much easier and fun to do it when you've got some bandwidth, some runway to play with, right? Because now it's like, oh, I just learned that companies between 1 and 2 million EBITDA sell for 1 to 2 times EBITDA. But if I can get to 3 million EBITDA, now it's like 5 times EBITDA, right? There's going to be that inflection point where they have a goal and you can actually kind of rally around it. It might actually take you out of that complacency mindset. You'll probably take yourself back, back a few stages. You might go back into Blunder a little bit to get up there. But with the new goal, like if we're getting in the car, the goal is, hey, we got to get to this benchmark so that we can have a successful exit. But
that's
I
our
do,
kind of target
yeah,
equity valuation. Let's get one done. What's the gap? That's where we've got to get it to. What's going on in the market around us? What do we got to change? Okay, let's make a plan
yeah,
again and
yeah.
get there.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
And then you and I pre-chat, pre-recording, we're talking about some of the other options. You don't necessarily it doesn't necessarily mean you have to sell your company. On that journey, you might unlock whole other ways to empower your company, maybe to run without you. If you've, decided you don't want to be there on a daily basis, you might uncover the opportunity to do something like an employee ownership plan. You might have all kinds of things that come up there. If exiting doesn't necessarily fit anymore. But
Yeah.
the point being that like you can layer on a new set of ratios essentially when it comes time, if you're looking at exit, and apply everything you know about running your business successfully today to getting it to a place where it's ready for you to exit successfully as well. So yeah, very similar principles.
Brilliant. And on that note, as an entrepreneur, what does freedom mean to you, Tracy?
Oh man, I think freedom is, I'm learning a lot about that for me. Um, Time freedom is really important to me.
Yeah.
But what I've learned is I get more time freedom when I have the right mindset around what I am doing. When I have an abundance and a clear mindset about the work that I'm doing, I actually feel a ton of freedom while I'm sitting at my desk. But when I have the wrong mindset, I could be anywhere. I could be sitting on a beach and I would feel like I
Love
didn't
it.
have freedom. So
Yeah.
for me, 2025 is a real year of, I guess, a clear mindset around approaching challenges and approaching abundance, like either way, right? So that
Yeah.
I can feel that freedom no matter where I'm sitting. So that's my very
Love it.
esoteric, yes.
Thank you so much for coming on. I really
You bet.
appreciate it, Tracy. It's been
Oh,
fantastic
thanks.
talking to you.
Thank you. It's been such a joy talking to you as well.